Thank you. Thanks, Josh. That was great. And thank you all for coming. Let's just get started thinking in public. So here we go. Great. So I propose we interrogate meaning in design. Let's investigate our methods, go beyond our comfort zone of physicality. Let's leave room for thinking in public. The poet Wallace Stevens employs the blackbird to describe the relationship between humankind and nature, between beauty and emotional resonance. The blackbird is an underpinning for meaning, content as part of fabricated context. The Studio Joseph is an architectural studio. Our practice focuses on public buildings, exhibitions, and installations for libraries, museums, and universities. We're interested in learning outside the classroom, cultural diversity, shared human experiences in the public realm. So we navigate difficult histories, sensitive subjects, and take on pragmatic challenges. And to be honest, we attack subjects that often kind of evade singularity, and we certainly don't always solve problems. But overall, our practice is a celebration of artistic achievement, beautiful, spiritual, cultural evidence of human existence. So to bring these stories forward, we need to think boldly while obsessing on the details. If we build in concrete, we say, even a tiny picnic pavilion will endure, an iconic form meant to be inhabited. Placemaking exists between the physical environment and our aspiration for people to come together, to bond despite differences. Refuge. We sit on the edge between two different demographics, a soccer playing field and a toddler playground. A pavilion shelters this fractured neighborhood from the Dallas heat. Some just perch, but there's a secret interior. It's actually just an indigenous palapa held inside a modern box. So the seating embedded in the earth, and above, party hats, skylights that foster convection currents. It's bright, playful, literally cool. It's not about the endurance of architecture, but the endurance of community. Let's move beyond utility to meaning. Let's think about it. Form is a greeting. I believe every institution has a soul, a central driving spirit. Your greeting is a divulgence of who you are. Starlight is a light installation, a hello in the entry lobby of the Museum of the City of New York. It's not an object, it's a narrative. Starlight serves as the hearth, a meeting place, an anchor. It's the museum's mission, connecting past and present, community, and collections. Starlight is pixelated, holding individual LED points of light, 5,238 to be exact. 5,238 points instigate movement through a moire effect of the uniform grid. It doesn't move, but it's never static. It fosters exploration. And then something completely unexpected. The plot comes full circle. Design for public spaces is about a back and forth. You are invited into a conversation with those you do not know. You're invited into a new story. Our insertion of an exhibition at the Corning Museum of Glass is a supportive voice. It's planar and elemental, beginning a discussion, Our voice leaves pauses, openings, where visitors can insert themselves into the minds of the artists. Is it beauty forward or mysterious, compelling? The way you see things changes what you see. What are they thinking? Design is not mute. Digging deeper here. Museums are structured to forward the curatorial voice. PhD experience with its singular interpretive lens has shaped a very passive visitor experience. Visitors are being led. They don't have to think. I would say passive is no longer acceptable. We encourage independent thinking. What is your understanding of history, of culture, of yourself? Our design is messy, inclusive, and complex. Artifacts, objects, they have their own stories to tell. They talk and they talk over each other. At the National Museum of the American Indian in DC, visitors come as a form of cultural tourism. They're met by tradition, regalia, blankets, pottery. They leave, essentially leaving American Indians at the door, thinking they are not a part of their life. But America is a reflection of those who were here before the Europeans. Indians are everywhere. In our movies, sports, language, landscape, products, our relationship with nature. The way to foster thinking in public is to present with space around information, places to gather, comfy places. And here, just a quick shout out for upholstered furniture in museums. So we ask questions. Let's come from a place of curiosity and openness. It's a radical rethinking of how history is traditionally told. It's meant to challenge. It's complicated. So let's just say that. We present evidence. Evidence reminds us that what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget makes us who we are. Native regalia are not mute. They tell stories of bravery, passion, the meaning of life in nature, relationships between humans and animals, humans and humans. We need to give our visitors a place to think about it, to think abstractly, to understand what they're doing and where they are. So building on the last section, how do we keep things interesting? Embrace the unexpected. So let's have fun. Let's be joyous, engage the lyrical. Stephen Burrows, awesome fashion designer of the 1980s, spatial ideas came from his layered fabrics. But in truth, what made this installation sing was literally the soundtrack. That Studio 54, 80s vibe, Michael Jackson, Prince, Whitney Houston. The museums usually asked us to control sound. They want us to walk in silence. But let's employ the quality of sound as a spatial experience. So hold on that thought. Experiential design means celebrating all our senses, thinking beyond the number 5. The fact is, we all have different abilities, personal ways by which we navigate the world. I wanted to encourage exploration, through touch, sound, smell, haptic elements. Let's think beyond an ocular-centric world. Think what color feels like. It's a mood, bright, passionate, cool, pensive, loungy. What does it make you feel? For this installation at the Cooper Hewitt, we took a chance. We thought about space in color and texture, hanging strand curtains on curving armatures, sometimes opaque, sometimes only a filter. Here, color is warm, spirited, vibrant, kind of yummy, like candy. Here it's layered, mysterious, slow, smoky. The plot is told by the content, artistic artifacts designed for interaction. A smell is a memory, emotion, a mood. The guy in the middle, what is he doing? He's rubbing a fur wall to compose a unique musical composition that's sort of emanating sound from behind. It's performance, it's sensual, and all sort of is from within and of the visitor themselves. So our work is the set for discovery, or whatever she's doing here. So remember concrete? The Romans built in concrete, and their places endured. Their religion, not so much. Mithraicism, not resilient. The London Mithraeum is a ruin. Archaeologists conjecture, but they simply don't know what happened in these temples. A ruin is an incomplete story. Our plot is a temple in light. It emerges from the darkness and reappears. Columns are shadows, and as architects, that was challenging. Think about what's not there as much as what is. So we hinted interpretation with sound and media, but it's really the visitor who completes the story on their own. Mystery and spookiness embrace the theatrical part, the larger cadence of drama and respite. But okay, back to evidence. On the same site of Bloomberg's headquarters, archaeologists also unearthed 17,000 and change artifacts. So what were they? The personal, practical, architectural, performative tools, and in truth, a lot of pot shards. While the sheer size of the deposit is impressive, we want the visitor to form a relationship with one of them. So let's understand Romans, they were like us. They had lives and families, jobs, and dreams. So if you're wondering what it means to work in content, thought I'd give you a little glimpse behind the scenes. This is for especially for the media designers on the call. What's it like to really look around? That's Monica, who's my partner there in the background holding a box. We went through all 17,000 and selected some 1,600 for that case that you just saw. We selected them for their ability to communicate. We're hands-on. We're in the archive. We're on the floor. We're in a makeshift full-size mock-up. And again, we're obsessing on the details. So personal evidence from Roman citizens does tell a story. Their sandals and belt buckles and combs, writing tablets, these artifacts are beautiful. And strangely, as we develop empathy, there's a bit of sadness in our connection with these people of 2,000 years ago. Empathy is essential. It's essential for us to understand each other. 2,000 years from now, who will find our sandals and combs and iPhones? And what will they say about us? So a little rethinking as well. The Valentine Museum asked us to rethink. And here's where it comes in to sensitive subjects, difficult subjects that we really need to pause and treat with sensitivity. Edward Valentine was an eminent sculptor. His work glorified the lost cause and American myth. Located in his freestanding studio on a museum campus, the Valentine created heroic imagery of the Confederacy, and that is him on the left. On the right, you see works of sculpture from Monument Valley, Monument Avenue, sorry, in Richmond, Virginia. So in 2020, these monuments were defaced during protests and then removed from public view, catalyzing a national movement. Sculpting history, the exhibition title, becomes a literal metaphor for how we unpack systemic racism. It's a bold intervention in Valentine's same studio. Tables with interpretive texts and supporting artifacts inhabit the space. But the sculptures are behind a scrim. The scrim is both a mitigating device and becomes part of a media presentation of relevant Richmond histories in sync with strategic illumination of these sculptures held behind. So it's active and dynamic and draws you into the story. So this sort of transformation of the studio from showcase to evidence-based history. The studio no longer is a place for the creation of myth. The experience is transformed to tell another story, to let visitors have time to rethink history, to think about why these things happen and how they happen, and the power that we have to make changes. It didn't happen this fast, I'll tell you that. But it's nice to see how things come together. Again, sometimes it's nice to sort of take a peek behind the curtain and see what happens. There you go. Take time to sculpt history. So, this is the space. So, what do you think? It's now our chance. I believe that thinking in public is a way we can connect to each other. And design can also be just the lightest touch, just a hint, just a support for some of, in this case, Donatello's most beautiful sculptures. It can leave room. Design can leave room for thinking in public. Thank you.
All right, Wendy, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. All right. Should we put some questions in the chat? I have thoughts, I have questions. Okay, I'm gonna ask some questions. All right. So Wendy, one of the things you talked about was like that institutions have souls. So like, how do you find the soul of a museum or an institution?
That's a great question. That is difficult. Um, what we do is we come at it openly and we begin the project by just talking with people, talking with not the director, talking with stakeholders, talking with all the people who are there to try to listen and find out why are they there, what it is that motivates them, what is their story to be told. And so out of that comes the sense of soul. And it doesn't, what I think at the Museum of the City of New York, where this sort of first came up, the director talked about the fact that a lot of museums, in a search for finding their soul, will do fancy renovations. You know, they'll clean everything up, polish everything, nice new lighting, everything placed just so. And while they think they're amplifying who they are, sometimes they're just masking over who they were and not sort of letting it rise from inside.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that's really interesting because it's sometimes they're kind of like borrowing the soul of an architect. You're just like, oh, it's like you're like, oh no, that's Frank Gehry's soul. That's not the soul of the institution, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so Wendy, so you're like a traditionally trained architect, and like your practice, like you guys also do like buildings and things like that.
Sure.
I'm just sort of curious, as you sort of move from like traditional architecture into sort of more experience design, like what in your training was like actually useful? And like what did you have to kind of like learn on the job?
Well, first of all, anybody who tells you they're not learning on the job is in trouble. It's always so different. I would say that, I started on a personal level, and then I'll get to the studio. I started my practice at the office of IMPay, Paycop Freedom Partners. And so I began with large scale projects, skyscrapers and courthouses, kind of things in the big public realm. But my final project working there was on the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And it was then that I learned that actually form does have meaning, and that there's a way of thinking about space to evoke meaning that goes beyond sort of what you would see in the exhibition, but what you sort of feel as you enter in a place. And I knew that once I had worked on that project, I could sort of never go back. That it was no longer going to be for me solving problems, looking at sort of data and how many square feet and all of that. It always had to be personal, and it always had to be about the ideas behind place. So in the office, the Studio Joseph, we began years ago with a women's history museum in Dallas. And that again helped to hone these skill sets. But it is true that I believe the architectural training is one that does take into account why we do what we do, in addition to what we're doing. And so the ability, the craft does help us to imagine things. And with our clients, that ability to imagine early in the process invites everyone in. So the architectural training in the used to be plans, sections, elevation, it was all very abstract. But now we work in realistically in three-dimensional renderings. And so everyone can participate. And that in itself gives us a more meaningful product.
I love it. I love it. So one of the things you said was like the way you see things change what you see. I really like that. I kind of wrote that down on a post-it note. But like, can you kind of like add some examples or context to that?
Sure, be happy to do that. I think that a lot of times we're very sort of, our eyes are driven towards objects
Yeah.
and not understanding sort of the context around them. So that the way that you see something is how the light hits it, how you see it, what it's seen against, what's in the background, what did you see before? And then, in fact, what do you see afterwards? So in a way, what you're looking at is sort of part of a threshold into what it is, but also something that you're going to take with you as you move past it.
Yeah, no, totally. Sharon Crockett has a question. Sharon, do you want to ask it yourself? Or you want me to do that for you? Oh, your audio is a little janky there. Oh, I can ask for you if you like. Um, how much do you use physical models as part of your process? Or like, and if not physical model, like what, let's you want to talk about some of the other tools that we use or like that you guys use in your process to sort of envision space?
Sure. I mean, physical models are really helpful at different scales. So for buildings, yes, it is helpful to see the entirety as a place, as an object. But to be honest, we use a lot of full-size mockups. We're constantly making things in the office. We're constantly printing everything out one-to-one. We are never tied totally to screen-based ways of thinking. And that's very important to us. We're always, the office is piled high with samples. Texture matters. So this whole visceral quality of what we do is very important to us. So we use everything we can. We use prototyping, full-scale prototyping, making things, changing things. We use all kinds of, any kind of method that we can. Sometimes it's very scrappy and things are just sort of glued together. And other times they need to be more polished in order so that people can understand the refinement and the detail of what we're going to build. But I think that the physicality of what we are driving towards has to be part of the process. You know, we like to say that the process is part of the solution, right? And that process, you can't get to a specific place unless that becomes an element in the journey.
Yeah, totally, totally. And one of the questions that I have is, and I probably know some of the answer, but like, how do you think about media? Like, how do you think about like interactivity? Like, how do you think about integrating that into these experiences?
I love it.
All right, you can bash it if you like. I'm good.
Gosh, how can I say any different after working with you? Think about, for us, it's so exciting to work with things that we often talk about that strange term physio digital, whatever,
Awesome.
you
Yeah, yeah,
kind
we
of
need a better
mesh.
term.
It's that
Yeah,
meshes it all together. I love that part. And I like to be able to it to me, it's another layer of thinking we always do about light. So as an architect, we had light. People talked about light all the time. But sometimes it's also about going beyond that to things that you can interact with, that you can change on your own. And I find that extremely exciting. We, for those of you who are here, might not know, but we worked with Blue Cadet on the new MIT museum. And there was a lot of exploration into themes and subject matter that is difficult to understand without necessarily participating in it. And so I think a lot of the success for the visitor there is being able to sort of participate in an action and understand what it's doing. So it isn't just uh, AI, the word, or this idea of something. It's how you work together and how you can collaborate. And I just think that the opportunities are great, and we want to keep that going. I'm sort of
yeah.
still trying to sort of bring that actually more into the architectural side of the practice as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Darla has a question, which I think she wants me to ask. It's a long one. All right. Thank you so much, Wendy. Question, a long one. How do you think is the best way to balance the tension between design, by which I mean an intuitive sense of beauty, form, if you will, and more didactic information generally offered at museums as like educational institutions? There often seems to be a tension between the two. Or do you lean heavily towards physicality, beauty, form? What about people who are not immersed in our knowledge?
Yeah, great question. So interpretation needs to be, on our mind, it isn't a blanket response. So if you see a painting in a museum, then there is a museum voice that can help you along here, right? And the question is, what do we expect of that? And what do we expect of that voice in different ways? There is a tendency sometimes to, is it just, and the term tombstone sort of says it all. It's sort of the death of the object, It's like, okay, here are the facts, and it leaves it open. And that is perfectly fine for a lot of things. And again, it goes back to this idea of thinking like, but other times interpretation can really help us along. It can help us to understand things in different ways that you might not see. It's a prompt, okay? So as a prompt, we believe that there's a room for interpretation. Now, at a certain point, physically, it can overwhelm the sort of emotional, visceral experience of being with something. And that probably is too far along that part of the spectrum. That's where, as you say, media might come in. It could be just a code to get information later. That's fine too. But the trick is to not think about interpretation as one solution for an institution or even for a whole, but to think about it much more individually. And the other part of that too is, what can you bring to this that helps the visitor along? How can you say, remember what you've seen before here? Or can you connect to something else that you've seen? Or is there a connection outside of this to music or to another a place that you might have been? So to help people to sort of understand a process for communicating, so that they can take that with them on their own as they move through. I don't
Yeah,
know, beginning. It's a big conversation to
it's a
start.
big conversation. I love it. I think one of the things I thought was like kind of hilarious was your shout out to upholstered furniture. And just like, I have like all these different thoughts about like why that's such a big revelation. Like, why do people not consider that? Like why, like may I have my own theories, but like why do you think it is that like when you're designing these spaces, like stuff like upholstered furniture or like music sometimes like don't even get considered?
Absolutely. In fact, the sometimes when we all compete for work, right? So we're not to always just handed projects. And I remember later the curator at the National Museum American Indian mentioned that one of the reasons that they chose to work with us is that we showed renderings with comfy furniture.
Yeah.
And that idea that a museum is also a place of social gathering. And we want to foster that. We want to kind of prompt in, casual discussion between people who might not otherwise have met. We want people to sort of have time to just digest what they're seeing. There's sometimes, especially, certain kinds of museums are so dense. There's
Yeah.
so much there that if you don't stop, you don't take a moment, um, you're not going to really remember, and it's not going to have that sort of transformative sort of ability for you as a person. I say that also, uh, I don't know where the design aesthetic of the sort of, church pew came from in museums. Part of it might be practical, but in truth, there is no reason that we shouldn't be encouraging visitors to dwell. We shouldn't be sort of just making a sort of casual nod to that. We should be encouraging that and kind of extending that length of time and not trying to cut it down because people are just exhausted.
Yeah. Oh no, no. It's so funny because like I know you and I have had these conversations where you'll talk to a curator, you'll talk to someone at these museums, and like we want people to like dwell in this space longer. We want them to pay attention, like we want them to focus. I'm like, why don't you like give them a place to sit? Like, like if you want them, if you want longer dwell times, like people dwell on seating all the time for like good amounts of time. That's not a question. I don't know.
No,
But I think it also has to do with I think the difference between a curatorial like led experience and a visitor led experience, where it's like if you're thinking about the visitor and you're empathetic towards that visitor, and you're thinking about like, okay, where are they going to sit? Where are they going to gather? It's like a kind of a different point of departure for how to design a space. Again, not a question. Okay, Julianne Olson has a question. Do you want to ask it or should I ask for you?
Um, I can ask it. This is kind of
Great.
piggybacking on that same question, what we've been talking about, but I would love to hear a little bit more about how your approach to accessibility, because I know that often gets brought up almost as a competing pole, right? Of this sense of the design, the beauty, interpretation, and honestly, affordability. And so I just wanted to learn more about your approach to really making accessibility incorporated into what you do.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And I sort of started a conversation on that during the presentation, but when we uh, when we work with museums, we always sort of include very, very specific times to make sure that it's embedded throughout, but also we like having a kind of almost like a workshop to set this up, as you said. We think about it like on three different parts of accessibility. Obviously, physical accessibility, and as architects, of course, we're trained with that, and there's all kinds of physical rules and standards. But they're really not enough. It's a beginning. It's a way to get started, and it deals with certain types of things. Physical parameters mostly have to do with um, uh, physical space and movement and such as physicality. But more and more, we think about sensory accessibility as well, what that might mean, people being able to hear, people being able to sort of see things, people being able to sort of understand environments. And we also think sort of cognitive accessibility. And you asked about interpretation. Interpretation should be meaningful for everyone. It shouldn't be at a level where it's not really communicating to people. It should be something that we can all join in and learn from as well. So I think that there are a lot of uh, there's a lot of history in museums that isn't as accommodating as it should be to everyone. And there's a lot of diversity. A lot of the people who are polled to come to museums find the whole environmentally overly stimulating. I think there's sort of a neurodiversity issue that we need to think more about. And there's a lot that can be done there. Especially when you asked before, when Josh, we were talking about media and such, there's a lot we can do to enhance an experience in that way. So yeah, it's a great question, and I'd like to learn more.
Yeah. I mean, I'd actually love to kind of like also like tag on about prototyping because you mentioned a little bit, but I think one of the things with accessibility is you don't really know how something actually works until you've actually tested it with a range of people. And one of the reasons to prototype and to do things at one-to-one scale, whether it's media or whether it's just like even the setting up the environment, is like being able to like actually see like, is this accessible, and like does it even work?
Mhm. No, absolutely. And I think on when we worked together on the MIT project, there was a lot of one-to-one scale prototyping. And so when day one came and people started coming into, there weren't as many surprises. That we had a sense of what it would be. It was a more open process that took us there.
Yeah, totally. One of the things that was mentioned a little bit was affordability. And like I just also just like wanted to give a shout out to you and your team for just being like super pragmatic and being able to like work across like a whole range of like materiality and price points. And like I think like one of the things that's really is sometimes like easy to miss is that like the stuff that you did for Cooper Hewitt, like a lot of that was just like string. like it's gorgeous, but it's like not, you're not using fancy materials.
No, that design grew out of Monica's, my partner Monica Coughlin. She was, I think we were at the bowl on the carpet. I shouldn't tell your story, you could tell it, but a carpet showroom, and they had these the material that they used to make their carpets, and they were sort of sample ends as you use to make carpets up on the wall. She's like, wow, this is beautiful. Is it possible to just get that as a raw material? It was fantastic. And it was so beautiful, these twists, these strands of multicolors and such. And that enabled the whole design. So again, you know, it's just a very simple translation from something that is a raw material and easy into something else. So that was fun. The curving, oh, I see I see Karen here from UVA. I'm thinking about the Jeffersonian walls that stand up. They're only 1 brick thick. At the Cooper Hewitt, you cannot attach to the historic infrastructure. So by making these areas into curves, they had that ability to sort of stand up on their own and not need that kind of attachment. So again, there's sort of tricks to making it work, and as you say, making it work without necessarily, you know, having too many resources going towards them, let's say, and kind of, but is thinking about sort of the structural aspects of things as well as the experiential part, and sort of bringing those together. Yeah.
Brad, you had a question.
Sure. Yes. This is great. Thank you so much, Wendy. And thanks, Josh, for pulling another one of these awesome talks together. My question was really about how do you communicate through design the touch versus no touch spaces in your environments? Like you've got a great mix, the fur wall, and then there's the Corning space that feels a little bit more hands-off and sort of more traditional as an art setting. But I'm really curious about blended spaces that are both touch and no touch. And how does your team go about sort of teaching visitors where to engage and maybe where to pull back?
No, great question. And there is no one real answer there. I think that what we don't want to do is have it feel like it's usually objects are kind of in jail, you know, to feel like you can't get there, and it's just the barrier becomes it becomes the experience of a piece. It becomes the piece and the barrier together, and not separately. And so that is something that we try to avoid very much so. You know, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I personally think that, you know, beeping sounds, you know, are really distracting to everyone. That again, visible barriers, little hands with X's through them. Maybe there's other ways to signal instead of those. So one thing we do is we try to set up sort of the armature of the display so that it's sort of built in more naturally to things. The Corning Museum of Glass, that was very difficult because in fact, you know, you can't, it's glass. So there's an inherent fragility to that. But people, just because it was uniformly glass doesn't mean that people didn't want to have their hands all over it. So I don't think that there is actually any museum environment where there is this sort of, you know, complexity of touch and no touch. But I like to sort of have it just feel that way as in the space, and that you don't feel like you are going to get closer to it because it is a layering of the way that things are laid out in the exhibition. There might be sort of things that are more friendly before you get to something else, so that as you're sort of proceeding through, you can have sort of a series of thresholds that are sort of giving you that personal space to sort of, they kind of clue you in that you're staying away when you get there. The other thing that we use sometimes is, again, it's just part of slowing it down a bit. When people go to museums, sometimes they're racing, or they're trying to get ahead, or there's too much crowding. Giving it like devices that help to slow you down, to slow the pace, that will also increase the safety of the objects as well, because people aren't sort of like coming at them, that you're sort of breathing into things. So again, having things very tight together, people are like boom, 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 and they're just sort of walking. But then if you sort of say one thing and it's sort of like, ooh, you step away, that's another way. But again, good question, because that is one of the most difficult places.
Hey, Winnie, how about that? How about we did with the audio cones at the MIT Museum? I thought that was a really interesting technique.
Yeah, that was fun. So again, at the MIT Museum, we were looking, when you asked about the soul of an institution, I think what we learned right on is that MIT is not a place, but it's not an institute. It's actually just a collection of people. Now they're scientists, but they are people too. And so they all have stories to tell. Like, why did they want to study what they did? What got them interested? What is it about their history, their personal history, or their experience, or their teacher, or whatever happened that made them sort of go the path they did? And what is it that keeps them on that path further and further, their detail and their knowledge and their ability to share knowledge? So we created a series of kind of large cone shapes, abstract, and working together between media, lighting, and physical design. When you approach these cones on the wall, which are very simple and abstract, you're invited to the center of them, first by a projection onto the floor that asks a question. And then as you come closer, there's a kind of a pulsing light that lets you know that it's active. And then you might hear a scientist or someone involved at MIT talk about their experience. And I think that the talks themselves were very clever in that they are highly personal and kind of cheerful, I would say, about the reasoning behind it. So again, you have to operate on many different layers. It's not just enough to sort of put something up and let it happen. You have to sort of think beyond that. Multi-sensory.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question. Francisco, you have a question.
Yeah, I was wondering how you integrate like digital media experiences into your exhibit. If there's like, do you design around a specific digital experience, or is that designed to accommodate the space? It seems like, from the renderings and all, like an excellent integration of the two. I'm curious like how you get there and where that starts in the design process.
Yes, I will say that for the last project that I showed, the Valentine Studio at the Valentine Museum in Richmond, originally there was no media in that particular instance, and we created the environment, and there wasn't really a way to both kind of let visitors understand the ideas and the sculptures, but at the same time disempower them. And out of that came this idea that we needed to have more storytelling, and the storytelling needed a kind of a literal as well as metaphoric ability to sort of layer over the physical artifacts. And so it grew out of that separately. And then as we started to work on it, the space started to shape again around that. So it isn't sort of 1, 2, it's definitely 1, 2, 1, back, forth. And it just, there's a pulse to how it works. And again, testing, going back to the community, asking questions. Are we hitting it right? Aren't we? What are their sensitivities? And that project in particular gained a lot from intensive community engagement at every single phase along the way. And not just going out and telling your story, but listening and making changes from what you hear. And not all institutions are brave enough to do that. But in this case, that bravery really led to something that became both sort of the museum itself, their own self-interrogation of the history and being able to tell that, as well as of the community. So everything could come together. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as powerful or as unified.
I'm gonna jump on just a second on that one too, just because like we've worked with Wendy a ton, like having media partners very early in the process, because it tends to be very, very collaborative, and there's a lot of blurring, honestly, between the teams. And then like things can go back from being like a physical to a digital, and like I mean there are times where there'll be things in our scope where like this should not be like digital, and it'll go back and forth. If you can have that sort of open collaboration in the beginning where there's a lot of pliability in the project, you end up with a much better result.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, we're at time. Wendy, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Thanks for joining. Thanks everybody for being here today. Do you have any sort of parting thoughts or words before we exit today?
I would say thank you, Josh, and for this opportunity, and thank all of you for coming. And I just my last thought is please take time and think in public.
Love it. All right, thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you guys all again soon. Have a good one. Thanks again, Wendy. Thanks, Monica. Bye.